All right. Welcome, everybody. We are just getting going here as people are filing in and joining. Welcome to the Pond webinar series. We would love anyone joining to add who you are, where you're from in the chat, and especially if you've got specific positions you're trying to hire for or any issues you've been facing, please jump in with questions and comments throughout. We'll try to get to all of them in real time. So excited to hear more. I will quickly go over Pond. I'm Mitch Stein. I'm the co-founder and CEO. We're a marketplace for all the tools and services nonprofits need to thrive, where it's not only free, but you actually get paid to use the platform. And you'll get paid for joining this webinar, actually, if you fill out our survey at the end of it and let us know what you think. So please don't forget to do that. Without further ado, we have an amazing group gathered here today that's going to be sharing so much wisdom on this tough topic that a lot of people are struggling with, we know. And I would love to go around the room and have everybody introduce themselves and just share a few layers of their identity that are important to them in the work they're doing. So I will kick it off to my right here and have Johnny go first.
Thanks, Mitch. I'm so happy to be here, and thanks for hosting this great forum. My name is Johnny Cooper. My pronouns are he, him. I'm based in Chicago, but all over the place. And I'm the founder of Cooper Coleman, which is an executive search and consulting firm that focuses specifically in the social sector, helping move organizations forward and help organizations find access to the right talent at the right time for their organizations.
Awesome. Judith, could you go next?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Judith Dumont, and I'm the Vice President for Organizational Development at the SPCA of Texas, which is located right in the middle of downtown Dallas. And I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me. And some of the layers of my identity is I'm a woman in leadership. I'm a single mom, right? So there's different needs sometimes you need when you're a single parent who's coming into the workforce and the workplace. And I'm someone who stands on a lot of social justice platforms. So things like that are very important to me to explore all those intersections. So very happy to be here and to share, but also to learn.
Awesome. Yolanda, could you go next, please?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Yolanda F. Johnson. I wear a few different hats that qualify why I'm here today, I think. I am the founder of Women of Color in Fundraising and Philanthropy. It's an international organization that champions and supports women of color in the social sector, in the good work sector, I call it often. And under that particular umbrella, we do a lot as far as careers are concerned. We have a career center. We have done a great deal of research. We have a top 10 search firm ranking that's taken very seriously by the sector for search firms that work for women of color. We've dug very deep in that space. And also, I am the founder of Allies in Action Membership Network. After I created Woke, I heard from a lot of allies in this current racial justice movement who wanted to do better and give up that privilege and understand how to be allies in this space. And so we've worked very in depth. That's a lot of heart work that we've done there to help allies be more inclusive and support Woke. And then I also am the president of Women in Development New York. And so there's a lot of career advancement that happens with that organization. It's the foremost organization for people in philanthropy in the New York City area. So that's why I'm here. And I have, just like Judith said, I have a lot that I'd love to share and a lot that I love to hear and take in and learn. So thanks for having me.
Amazing. And Rebecca, could you go last here?
Sure, yeah, and thanks so much. I join colleagues in being happy to have this wonderful forum, and Mitch, congratulating you and figuring out ways to bring the nonprofit sector together and think about best practices, which is a huge, huge need. My name's Rebecca Newworth. I'm based in New York City. I'm the EVP, which is sort of like the chief secretary at Upwardly Global, which is an organization that's existed for about 20 years, just over. And that helps immigrants and refugees who come to the country with significant educational and professional backgrounds and find themselves vastly underemployed, figure out how they can tap into the job market in a way that actually uses the skills and immense talent and desire that they have to contribute. So it's a wonderful organization that tries to make the United States more of a country that we all wish it would be. I myself am the daughter of a refugee, several times refugee, and my mom had to leave with nothing on her back a few times and then remade her life. So had a lot of opportunity and privilege also here in the United States, and that's something I carry with me into my job. I'm also a mom and someone who feels so lucky at this particular time in our society to be working for a nonprofit. I feel like people are really looking for meaning, and I feel so lucky every day to have a job that gives that to me. So there's lots of other things we could be looking for, but meaning is not for lack of meaningful work. So
amazing. Well, thank you so much. It goes without saying that we've got a great group here today with a lot of great perspectives. So I'd love to jump right in. And Judith, I'd love to start with you as someone I know has been kind of on the front lines hiring a lot in this environment. And I'm hearing from a lot of people, hiring is normally hard, but now it just seems harder than ever. What is working? Can you give us a bit of state of play from your perspective on the hiring environment for nonprofits right now?
What is working? I'll tell you what's working. Experimentation and just sort of walking a little bit different than it ever has before. What we have done, I'm in the animal care industry, right? So we've already have a narrowed, very niche population that we look to recruit and to hire. But what we've started to do, and I really like what Rebecca said, people are looking for meaning, right? So what we're finding is that we have to translate our mission, translate what we do, and to also showcase transferable skills that can walk into our area, because I think a lot of reflection has happened in the last couple of years, and people are rediscovering who they are, what's important to them, and really what their value systems have evolved into become, and through some of that clarification. So some of the strategies we've done is we've done really intentional promotions. We're all the regular social platform sites, right? LinkedIn, Glassdoor, we're doing all of that. But we've also been pulling in different employee incentive. I'm not going to say that word right. Incentives, right? Referral programs where we're asking people to flex their own networks, not only our internal staff, but also some of our board of directors and also our donors, and really trying to communicate as well as we can what our mission means, how the local impact is occurring, and telling that story and really showcasing the positive points of that as we're bringing people in to hire. We've also gone through our actual hiring toolkit. We're looking at the questions we're asking and reframing some of those questions to make sure that we're showing up as an organization, not with these cliche different inquiries that we have for employees and how that's a fit. We're really trying to tap into a deeper level so that we're assessing culture to make that match very meaningful, as I think is really key. Some of the other things that we've done too is really trying to think through how we're engaging our employees and how we're attending to their performance, how we're attending to the learning and development. We've created an entire department in the last 4 months around that within our organization, because we found that happy employees recruit happy other potential happy employees. And so it's just been one of those moments in life where we've had to rethink how we're doing it, and we've had to take a couple of risks and just be nimble and innovate, right? So it's the first time in a long time that we've actually attended to the human aspect of it while also looking through different technology platforms as well. So I don't know if that gives you a whole lot of new ideas, but really flexing our people network, I think, has been something that's been important.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing from you too, Judith, is that it's a lot more than just like, okay, we need to hire and fill this position. There's work to be done behind the scenes. Johnny, I know like you get brought in, and I imagine a lot of people are just like, we need a new executive director, go. And I imagine there's work that needs to be done before that can be achieved. How do you advise people to set themselves up for success in hiring when they're thinking at the strategy level before executing?
Sure. Thanks, Mitch. It's really important for organizations to step back. It's far too easy for people to kind of get caught up in the mess of, we have this immediate need, we have to solve for this right now, and we have to fill in all these gaps. And you begin to react instead of respond to whatever the needs your organization have. So it's important to step back and look, assess the situation. What types of leadership qualities are we looking for in our next person, whether it's an executive director or the leader of a department, even a staff member at any level within the organization. So to really understand what those needs are and articulate those clearly in the materials that you're putting out, your job description, how you're advertising this, and because everything is a reflection of your organization and your culture, how you present yourself throughout the job search process. And so as you're preparing for these people, it's really essential that you have a really clear understanding of your culture, of your environment, that you're inviting these people to join. You're very much, the way I look at it in this talent market is it's very different than it has been in the past, where historically organizations had what the talent wanted: a job, a mission to get behind. Today, it's very different. Talent has what organizations want, and it's very much a talent market. So how do you set yourself apart as an organization from the folks that you're competing for? Because they're in high demand. And so everything from the qualities and the experience that you're looking for and the bullet points in your job description, those are a reflection of your culture. And so think big picture about how you're attracting rather than promoting the role, because it's just a wildly different environment that we're operating in.
Awesome. And with that, Yolanda, I think I've heard so many people be like, okay, well, where can I go to find talent? Where can I find diverse talent? Like just looking for the destination. And I know people come to you with those kinds of questions a lot. What's your response to that kind of question?
Well, our job board's one of the biggest places that diverse talent where they go to seek things. I'm very proud to say that. But it goes beyond that. I think that one of the most important things right now for potential employers is to ensure, when you're trying to see through that inclusive lens, not to be performative. There has been a humbling that has happened, to Johnny's point, where it is a seeker and candidates market. And so that's a lot of the work that we've been doing, is to coach and to help and do that resume review and help people understand. I personally, this, I've been a big advocate for salary transparency as a means of equity in the sector. So that's been something we moved forward. I testified with New York City, and it moved forward. It's going to be the law now, and a lot of other, next New York State. And then, but it's been fascinating, some of the pushback that I had received around that, and really having to help change attitudes and guide people. You can't change. Again, this is heart work, actually. It comes down to dollars and cents, but it really is about people. People change systems. So when you're looking for this talent, you have to just make sure that you're giving yourself the time and the space, that you are providing job descriptions and presenting the opportunity as something that would be attractive to a diverse candidate. The cookie cutter days are gone. You really have to listen to their voices. If you have resources you're sending after this, we've done a whole report on it with lots of information and feedback, at least from women of color and women. So I think that they're out there. You just have to make sure that they're being compensated fairly, and that you're creating something, and also to make sure that, just like we always say with leadership and boards and executive staff, they need to reflect the constituency. So people need to see themselves. So we have so many people that come to me and say, I want to be more inclusive with my hiring practices. And I say, well, have you done the work in your house yet? Your board is completely not diverse. Your senior staff is not diverse. What's that person going to be coming into? What's the environment going to look like? What's it going to be like? Are they going to be the first or the only? How's that going to play into how they're going to be able to get this job done? So a lot of people have done sort of a bit of a knee jerk, and they want to do the right thing, and that's beautiful. But you have to make sure that you're a place where a person of diverse background would want to work and would thrive, quite frankly.
Yeah, and just quickly, because we had a question come in the comments, Yolanda, about the work you've done specifically on that. And I'll also reiterate to the audience, jump in, ask questions, share needs you have, stuff you're looking for, definitely post that in the chat. But could you explain, I think people are really excited about what you've done here in New York City. If you could give a little bit more detail.
Well, what we know from different entities, I happen to be on the board of Power New York, a women's advocacy group who's really gotten behind this for years. So we're doing cartwheels over there. And the Institute for Women's Policy Research, all of the data really does point to the fact that salary transparency, some people don't see it, and so we're having those dialogues, is a means of equity on so many different levels. So I'm hearing from women of color all the time who are saying it's a waste of time sometimes. You know, if you give, if you don't give a salary, and I may agree with your mission, some things resonate with me, but I know that I'm not going to be paid something that allows for me to lead the life that I need to lead, then that's not going to work for me. So why shouldn't I know that at the very beginning before we go through 1 or 2 interviews? We should have that right there at the front. What other place do we not talk about money initially? Do you go shopping and you test drive the car and you take, it around for a spin, and then you're like, hey, how much does this cost? You're not going to spend the time to do that. And so I think it's only fair to people. And so the law is changing where you must state at least a salary range for any positions that you're posting so that people are aware. We also know that women don't get paid equitably with men. We are looking at Women's Equal Pay Day coming up in a month or so. And then the paydays get further and further for women of color. We've got Native Women's Equal Pay Day, Black Women's Equal Pay Day. They don't make as much as a white man would make until August or so. The days are still being finalized for 2022. But there's a lot of work to be done. And so just knowing at face value how you're going to be compensated, and it's not just about compensation, it is salary transparency, but it's what other policies do you have in place? How flexible is the job? Remote work is a big thing now, and remote work has its own set of issues around equity. And before we even went live, I was telling you, about the Zoom ceiling and what does that mean? Some people think it's great for people of color because they don't deal with microaggressions in the office. But what does your organization have going on right now that will be fair to people so that they'll know what they're getting into? So salary transparency is really important. If you don't understand it, call me. You may not be able to call me, but you can reach out to my team. We're happy to be voices of reason to help people understand that. But we're really excited that it's moving forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you for all of the work there. I know that's been a tremendous effort. And something you touched on a few times is the importance of mission in the nonprofit hiring process. Rebecca, I'd love to hear from you, given you're at a large organization that hires a lot of people, but you also your mission is around getting people employed that are deserving of that work. What's so unique about hiring in the nonprofit sector versus other spaces? And how can that be a real advantage to folks that are struggling to hire in the current environment?
Yeah, thanks. And I've enjoyed this conversation and want to sort of reiterate some of what Yolanda, you just said, and Johnny and Judith as well. I think, we're very lucky. I was literally yesterday morning just reading this article on how many people are leaving, first and foremost, not even because of pay, although clearly pay is huge, especially in entry-level jobs. Not only because of benefits, although benefits are huge, but really because of a sense that they are, they've been efficiencyed into being a cog in a wheel. And actually, none of us want to be that. And this has been a moment for people, for good or for bad, when we have an opportunity to reflect on, what are we doing? What is the daily grind? And how is it, we have a short life to live? It's very apparent and scary. And what can we be doing that's going to help us make that time meaningful for us? And the interesting thing that I find genuinely so moving is that for many people, and not everybody prescribes or and not everybody believes this, but I do, that for many, many people, for many of us, myself included, work is something that gives us a lot of meaning. Like, it is how we spend most of our time. I'm a mother as well as you, Judith. I spend more time at my work than I do with my kids. There's no question about it. And they're definitely the most important project in life, and they'll stick with me longer. But nevertheless, this is it. This is what we're doing with our time and our lives. And therefore, the opportunity to be involved in something that actually adds to our identity and allows us to contribute the time, the care, the thought that we desperately want to is so immensely meaningful. So I know at Upwardly Global, we've been doing a few things. First and foremost, and this resonates with everything we've spoken about, we've really been trying to look inward about how we can make sure that we're building a culture in the organization that is genuinely one that helps people to feel like they belong and are included and are engaged in meaningful work together with colleagues. And that's not only been easy, and we learned a lot. I think the three key things on that front that we learned is, to what Yolanda was saying around compensation and benefits. And just yesterday, actually, we finally built a transparent system. So yesterday, everybody got increases, which is wonderful. And also we were able to share the range that everybody is in. And this will allow us now moving forward to be able to do that with all of our new postings. So we're just ahead of the law, but because we believe in it. So feel really so excited about the ability to do that. Secondly, the issue of diversity. And this is something that we tell companies that we work with too. It is critically important that there is diversity at every level of the organization. A lot of companies, when they think about diversity, and this came up before too, they just hire entry-level diversity, like the low-paying jobs basically are the diverse jobs, so to speak. Well, that's a stereotype that we need to absolutely end. And it doesn't help, because if people don't see a path forward, and if we don't have diverse people in leadership who are thinking differently, then we're not going to actually build cultures that are any different from the ones we already have. So the idea of diversity, not just period, but diversity at the mid and high levels and in the boardroom too. I mean, it just needs to be throughout, is so critically important. And finally, I think something that's exciting is the idea that organizations, especially nonprofits, need to be devoted to being learning organizations. Because if we bring talent in that is not the talent that we've had before, then we need to be able to learn ourselves about how we work differently. And Johnny, you spoke about culture. I think culture is such an interesting word because it can be used positively. What's the culture we're building together? Or it can be used negatively. And we hear that a lot when we speak to companies, and they're like, oh, it's not a culture fit. And you're like, what do you mean a culture fit? It's a person. We're dealing with immigrants and refugees who may come from a different culture. What is it about your culture that cannot be embracing of this culture? And to me, that clearly says that our culture is not a learning culture. What we need to do is ensure that all of us are acting and encouraging others to have genuine learning cultures that can actually absorb new types of talent. Finally, I know for Upwardly Global, what's so important is to have a deep integrity in the communities in which we work. That helps us to bring people into our organization, and it helps us to work with companies and encourage them to hire that level of credibility and authenticity and truthfulness within our own communities. And finally, there are a lot of ways that I think companies can be thinking, and nonprofits as well, about how they reduce barriers to entry that are actually philosophical and also tactical. The philosophical pieces we've talked about. The tactical pieces include, in many cases, anybody who's using AI systems to scan resumes, that is a practice that we understand and we should probably correct if we're going to continue. AI systems always screen out non-traditional candidates, and that's not what we want to or can afford to be doing right now. Number two, what can we be doing to think differently about gaps in resumes? For a lot of HR folks, a gap in a resume is a reason to throw it away. We absolutely need to be thinking differently about that. And the fact that so many women left the workforce and presumably will be coming back into the workforce is yet another moment of that. We've been working with refugees and asylees who have gaps in their resumes because they had to leave countries forcibly and resettle themselves, including about 95,000 Afghans who have just come to the country. And there too, gaps in resumes is about life happening. And our companies and nonprofits need to be able to look and understand that actually enriches the experience people bring. It's part of what makes people the rich people that they are, with experiences that actually can profit us all. And I think I've spoken enough, so I will keep other tips, but I love this topic, and I feel very passionately about our ability at this moment in time, with all the factors at play, to finally break open the barriers that have kept folks out, and to hire the people that we need to make our organizations great.
Yeah, and there was a lot of vigorous nodding around the group here. So if there's anything in particular people want to respond to that Rebecca just raised, obviously go ahead.
Looking for my mute button. Thank you, Rebecca. You brought up so many great things, and from a culture piece, the addition of each person in an organization, whether you're hiring one in a year or 10, every additional person that comes into your organization incrementally shifts your culture. And Rebecca's point about being a learning culture is just so essential, because if you're not responding to that shift in culture with every new person, your organization probably isn't hospitable to people from diverse backgrounds. Your organization probably isn't thinking about how to be more hospitable. And so those are really fundamental things that we as leaders, as organizations that we represent, have to look inward and figure out, all right, how are we showing up for these folks that we're bringing to our organization? You also made a comment about gaps in resumes. I think that that's just ancient. We need to stop worrying about gaps in resumes completely. To your point, life happens, and life is going to keep lifing no matter what we do. People are going to leave the workforce to care for their family members, to have children, because culturally they didn't find a place of belonging. And what is a gap in a resume a reflection of? Not necessarily that candidate, but all of the other components and externalities that face that person in that role. And so if we're thinking gap in resume and HR folks are eliminating people, it's very myopic, and it's unfair, and it's antiquated. So I love that you brought that up, because it's something that we need to keep talking about so that people stop talking about it.
Totally. And I think it's great to get at some of those tactical things people can do, or red flags. I don't know if, Judith, in your experience, like, what are some things that you've found work best as you've been on the front lines hiring a lot? If there are things you've changed in your practices or in your interviewing that you've just found have helped resonate with, be it with a diverse lens to what you're doing, or just people having a better experience in the hiring process, period.
One thing that we have done, I have a higher ed background as well as nonprofit, so I've sort of always flipped back and forth. So higher ed, you have to have a committee for everything, right? So you have to bring people in and go through this really, talk about antiquated processes, right? But one thing that we've brought to the SPCA of Texas since I've been in this role is I have really wanted to have different people across departments come in and help gauge the talent to become part of that interview process, so that it's not just one corner of the organization who's making the most important decision for the organization, which is who we're hiring. And so pulling different people in that represent different levels within the organization, different positions within the organization, different cultures, just within the community, to get a more inclusive idea of who we're hiring and how they might fit, and truly listening. And here's the thing, it can't be an illusion that you want them at the table to make those decisions, but truly listening to the people around you say, I really like this person because, or I had a hesitation about this because. And so that way the culture in and of itself and who we're bringing in to our house, as Yolanda called it, right? Who we're bringing into our house really is a collaborative process, and it's something that we're co-creating together. I'm not a huge hierarchical, I don't focus on hierarchy a lot, right? I like this idea of a flattened hierarchy. And sometimes people who've been at the organization for 20 years and might not seem that ambitious, but have been in the same role forever, have a better take on what and how people might fit in and how they might contribute than perhaps the CEO. And so that's one thing that we've done, is to really create a round table of people to gauge the talent, which has been really important. The other thing that we've done too is to really bring that EVP, that employee values proposition, to the table. One thing I appreciated when I was interviewing, I went on an interview, the Great Resignation. I was like, I'm going to roll the dice for myself over the past year. And one thing I really appreciated about my interview process at the SPCA of Texas, I had gone online, I had read reviews. I kind of knew what some of the naysayers had said about the organization. I really liked how Rebecca framed culture as both good and bad, right? Because culture fit is something that I lead with values. So if I don't feel like I belong somewhere, I'll go out and find a culture that I do want to belong within, right? And I love that free will. I think everyone has it in life, and it's something we should all flex. It's been really important to tell the story of the organization as you're interviewing and to let people know where we're at. They were super transparent with me about we're having a leadership turnover. The culture is shifting. COVID has done this to us during the organization. And had they not led with that, and I've told my CEO this, she knows this, but had they not led with that and didn't lean into that and to really talk through that with me while I was interviewing, I wouldn't have trusted them. I wouldn't have gone in to work there because I knew what I read. I had talked to, it's a small world, Dallas nonprofit. You can pick up the phone and call people and kind of gauge what each organization is like. And had they not owned that and been really honest about it, it would have been a red flag to me. So everyone we've interviewed, and I'm talking entry level and to a chief medical officer, right? Because that's something we're onboarding right now, is to really tell that story and be honest about it, and to really talk through what values require, what benefits. We're shifting our PTO policy right now. We realized to be days, even though we're an animal care facility that has to be open 365 days a year, we've still got to bring this full package to our hiring process so that we are first choice. We want to be a first choice of work for people. And we also had to look at, do we have domestic partnership? Do we have a flex policy? Do we have remote? And so some of that has been something that we've had to accommodate as well. Someone shared something really great with me. They said they were at an interview and they said, tell us about your remote or flex policy. And the organization said back to them, tell us what you want and we'll make that work. So it's this idea about customizing the work experience for each individual, all the while being equitable, right? Because some roles can't function that way. But again, it's about that transparency of how you're communicating the job description, but really making sure that you're not selling something. I forgot who said it, this idea about really being, I forget the word that was used a little bit earlier, but really being straight up and straightforward about what the workflow can look like and what that can be, but attending to each person's needs along the way. And so we've really been looking at, instead of creating a hiring process that works for us, we want to put the candidate first and lead with the candidate and then figure out how to bring them in and make that happen. So that's something. But the other way that we're working at shifting this too is looking at internally all the new hires we've had in the past year, surveying them, compiling data about what did you like about the hiring process? What was it about our culture that sold you on this? Because we do know that people have multiple offers. I know when I accepted this position, I had 2 others on the table, and I truly had to take a week to just reflect and say, what is going to work best for me and my son? What's going to work best for me and my family? And in making offers, we've had people tell us that too. Well, I'm going to go ahead and go with this position because. So understanding your competition, understanding urgency and pace. You can't lollygag around right now while you're trying to fill a position, because people can get picked up somewhere else faster than ever. And so really making sure that you're attending to it, building that relationship, building that rapport, but being honest, transparent, and collaborative along the way have been some of the things that we've been doing at the SPCA.
Yeah, and then what I'm hearing from you too is it's no, it's great. I mean, if I could just summarize, it's about authenticity, right? So it is the fact that you're painting a picture, you're trying to paint this pretty picture, and actually goes a longer way to say, actually, these are the things we have issues with and what we're focused on fixing. And I think that goes a really long way. And it's just about candidate centricity in the process, and then making sure you're actually hearing and listening and getting feedback from people afterwards, and making sure you're acting on that. Because if you don't act on feedback you get from people, they're not going to continue to do that in the future.
Right. Feedback doesn't matter if you don't absorb it and internalize it. And the word I was thinking of is Yolanda's word of being performative. We can be performative about what it's going to be like to work for the SPCA of Texas, or we can be authentic about it. It's hard work. You have to enjoy physical labor. You have to enjoy kind of this controlled chaos that happens. You have to understand that when there's a snowstorm in Dallas and we shut down because there's 2 centimeters of ice on the road, you still got to get to work, right? So there's a different hustle sometimes, and you have to engage with that in the hiring process and to tell the real story. So thanks for clarifying that with the word authenticity, because that is exactly what's on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, I wanted to just add that quickly. I remember a while ago, I worked for an organization, and it dawned on me at some point, we were actually talking about how to engage board members, and speaking to somebody, and he's like, well, what do you actually want them to do? I was like, oh, that's a weird question. I thought it was like about how do we make them feel good? Oh, what do we actually want them to do? It has to be like a real thing. And very shortly afterwards, I had a moment, we were doing a strategic plan, and we had all these different buckets, and one of them was staff. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, this staff bucket, which I was leading, so I was predisposed to it, but still I was like, this is the most important one, because if the people we work with, our colleagues and us, don't actually believe this stuff, then like it is like, how on earth are we going to get, and maybe we can trick other people into believing it for a short period of time. But anyway, for sure, nobody wants to be part of an organization that is holding up those types of tricks. And I think that marketing effort that goes externally needs always first to be focused internally and making sure it's reflecting the realness of the organization, and maybe a fraction of the budget too.
And Judith, you have puppies and kittens, right? So that's all anybody needs to know.
And let me tell you, we let people know that you can I bring my dog to work. I'm working from home today. We get to take our dogs to work. We get, we have donkeys, horses. We have baby guinea pigs right now.
Love it.
So we get animal cuddles. We call it oxytocin drops, right? So sometimes we just go on puppy cuddle patrol. Having a bad day, come cuddle this puppy. You can't pay anyone to have that feeling, right? Like, you can't fake that. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, top of the list of benefits of working in a nonprofit is puppy time. So that goes a long way. Right. One thing that's tied into this topic we've been talking about, and Yolanda, I'd love to get your perspective on, and it's actually come up before the show today. We got some questions about remote hiring, both from, you talked about the Zoom ceiling, and I think there's just an assumption like, oh, we hire remote, so that means it's inclusive and we'll get, we'll be better for diverse candidates. But I think there are also, if you can't do it well, you're actually doing a disservice. And part of doing it well is like, okay, are you ready to hire remote? Can you hire in every state? Do you understand the compliance? Could you just talk a little bit through the considerations of doing that well, and where that can get in the way of your good intentions?
The I word, and that comes up so much in this space, the intention versus the outcome, and sometimes the realities of the situation. And that's why we all have to have a certain amount of grace and compassion when people are trying. But when it comes to the remote workplace, the key word is two key words: trust and preparation. So you have to be prepared to the points that you just made. You have to know, as far that you're in compliance. We have a project that we're working on right now and just didn't even dawn on us. Like our attorney said, well, certain things require licensing in different states, and this is going to be happening all over the country. So you just have to make sure you cross the I's and dot the T's. And so make sure you have all the ducks in a row as far as that's concerned, and you understand how this works, all of the implications, both from a pragmatic level and then also, most importantly, from a people level. So do you truly possess the trust to understand that an employee who is remote is working just as hard, has just as many opportunities for advancement as anyone else? And we know, just sometimes based upon our human nature, that isn't the case. That there are certain companies, not so much, well, there are some nonprofits that have this, but I've heard from people who have mechanisms even on their computers where it's like tabulating if you're typing every so many minutes, and if you get up from the screen, and are you really there, are you really working? And that's not an environment I would want to be in, and it's not an environment that I encourage anyone who asks me to be in, because that's an abject lack of trust. And so, can you treat the remote work environment in an equitable way where people aren't out of sight, out of mind? One of the most beautiful things I heard a few weeks ago was a colleague told me that she just got a promotion while on maternity leave. I've never heard that before. And that she got applause because, and her employer got applause. It happens to be a higher education institution. She had to check in a couple of times, but that was interesting to me also. She had to check in because they still needed to have that contact, but they trusted and understood and celebrated her hard work that she's always done. And so I think that if you understand what you're getting into, if you understand the investment that needs to be made in every type of way. We have I mentioned to you, a program coming up about this topic, and it's fascinating because now you're having even positions. We have a director of remote work who's going to come tell us about how they see things and how they prepare and how they create that positive and healthy, thriving remote environment. So just make sure, don't, again, that performative word comes into play. Your intention may be there, but are you really ready for that? Do you understand what it takes? And are you going to be fair to people? Are you going to be able to trust them? Are you going to have measures in place to understand what work is being done, how to quantify, how goals are being met, how to still bring people together and get to the heart of technology? There's so many ways you can do that. There are ways to do hybrid and bring people in for a retreat once a year or something like that. But there's so many different options out there right now. You just have to make sure that it works for you, because if you aren't honest with yourselves, then you'll end up creating quite a negative work environment, and a really inequitable one. So yeah, I think that's.
And Johnny, would you mind sharing a bit of the tactical piece of when someone comes to you and they're like, I'm open to remote? Do you sort of have a checklist you go down that's like, well, you got to make sure you have this, and this in place to do that?
In some ways, yes. What makes it a little bit easier now is, having, gone through 2.5 years of like forced remote work. So people are intuitively more aligned with what's needed. So, if somebody says, it's less often that we have a client that says, we're open to remote, than it is our saying, are you open to remote? Because that sort of opens up so many possibilities. But from a tactical perspective, it's a matter of like, are your managers, your supervisors trained to supervise people in a remote capacity? Because it takes a different skill set. It takes a different degree of understanding and empathy. And I think everybody on this panel's mentioned this, you have to show up differently in an environment that's not traditional. And so that's not intuitive to everyone. So are you training your people to manage the people who are remote? Do you have the communications mechanisms beyond just email to keep those people engaged? Do you make an effort to bring everyone together? Because it takes a whole lot more effort to do that. And so if the organization isn't committed to all of the extra work that might not necessarily be scalable, then a remote environment is not for them. And so that's something that we discuss with our clients. Are you ready for this? Are you prepared for this? Do you understand what this actually means for you? Because it's going to be a lot of work on probably, a few essential people to make that happen, and to scale that throughout the organization.
Yeah, and I love that, because I think the spirit of the question we got was more about like, am I ready to handle the tax and compliance requirements? And I think what I'm hearing from all of you is like, that's almost the least of your work. You want to make sure your organization functionally is ready to like manage people well, and you can figure out the more like legal tactical pieces of it as well.
Exactly. And, to the person who asked that question, a good accountant is all you need. They'll help you through that. What you really need to be focusing on is how you can show up for those folks who are remote, because it's going to make you better, as it's worth the investment of time.
Yeah. And another great question that we got in advance from an attendee is like, specifically, what do I do when I need to hire a new executive director, CEO, really senior positions? How does which I think we've talked a lot about how to help like the broader hiring process. And I think it'd be helpful to hone in on how does that change? Does that change when you're looking for a more senior role? And what are things that you need to be more mindful of? And I don't know if Judith, you want to start with that, or I can open the floor. Oh, you're still on mute.
It wouldn't be a webinar if someone didn't mess that up, right? Jeez, and it had to be me. When I think about, to be frank, Johnny and I saw each other about a month ago, and I was like, oh my gosh, we're having such a hard, because we're filling a chief medical officer role. I don't know if the world knows this or not, but there's this crazy veterinarian shortage. There's this age gap. You've got, people coming in and a lot of people retiring. So it's one of those things where there's scarcity there. So there's so much negotiation that has to happen with all of it. But it's also really tough to find great leadership. I know there's a wealth of talent out there, but for some reason, I think sometimes we're looking for someone who already has the experience, and we're not taking risks on young, fresh talent, diverse talent, and letting people. I just don't think you have to have every single skill mastered when you're applying for a job. I'll just put it to you that way. The point of a promotion is that you're growing into something. And so I think when you're looking at filling roles that are executive director, that are CEO, you have to think through what can each person bring and how do we look through that. You don't have to be the perfect fit. It's more about how ambitious are you? What's your vision like? How are you what kind of hustle do you bring every single day, and energy do you bring to the role? And really using your intuition as you're working with people. I know intuition isn't something that's quantifiable, but it's something I rely on a lot when we're vetting for talent. And I've had to kind of talk through that with my team as we're hiring, and the different managers and supervisors that we're training to hire. Is when you're sitting down with this person, and this is a wonky way to go about it, but it's just my own strategy, is, do I have more energy when they left the conversation, or do I have less energy when they left the conversation? And then you tap in with the people around it, because you can feel someone's leadership style just by engaging with that person and sharing ideas with them. But I really think when it comes to finding that, I do think search firms, Cooper Coleman has done tremendous work. If you follow them on LinkedIn, right? I'm going to give Johnny a plug, but they've done tremendous work in finding the right talent for organizations like Lambda Legal. And it's been something that you don't necessarily know all the time if you've got the right perspective. And sometimes when you partner with someone else and they have an objective view, it's it's going to bring you maybe more insight, more wisdom, and a better strategy to find that talent. Because one thing we were just talking about with our board of directors I was on a phone call with a member of our board last night, and he was talking to me about this idea of, when you are a leader, when you're sitting in the leadership role, we have animal care experts, but we also have people that have been across industry, right? Cross sector, right? And sometimes you don't have to be an animal expert to come in and lead an organization, because it's still a business. We're still trying to make our mission come to life. And so transferability is, and transferable skills is really something we have to think through, because much like, I loved your opening question today, I wrote it down and I'm feeling that, about, what components of your identity are you bringing here today? The same thing can be said when you're going through the hiring process and you're looking for talent, because just because you don't have every single box checked doesn't mean that you can't shift into that role and still be able to deliver that. So I do think it's about your network. I do think it's about relying on people around you that might have a different perspective, and attending to that and listening to that. So that's something that I think is key when looking for leadership.
And when you brought up this concept of being open-minded or flexible for the non-traditional, which putting in heavy air quotes, Rebecca, I'd love to hear, as I know that comes up a lot, especially with refugees who might not get recognition. Their licensure is different, or the degrees they got were different from where they came from. And I just think that's a great example where you could overlook potential because of the boxes you're looking to check. How does that factor into senior level executive hiring for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big key here, I would just underscore everything Judith said, and I think is to change the box that you have when you think of the person that you need for that position. And actually, I do think, especially executive director, CEO, those are hard positions to fill. And I think there's a second step too. Well, I think the first step would be partnering with organizations that are deeply connected to communities that are not traditionally being called upon. So we actually just hired a wonderful person. Took us a long time to find, and it was via the Women of Color and Fundraising group. So thank you, Yolanda, for that. Yeah, nice to be able to connect with different groups that have credibility on the ground, and that might be a little bit different than your LinkedIn. I know search firms would play the same function, and so would nonprofits like ours that are tapped very deeply into non-traditional talent. The second thing is, you got to get everybody on board. I think that's really important. Like, a lot of times when we're trying to have amazing candidates interviewing for positions, sometimes the head of the organization's on board, the hiring manager's on board, but the manager's not on board. You literally just need to have one person who doesn't share that vision of being able to think bigger to kill, especially a big hire. The board needs to be on board. So I think really talking before and building a sense of consensus about what we need in this position, and let's articulate what that is, and that may look different from the way it has in the past, feels critical. And the third very important thing, a lot of non-traditional CEOs and executive directors actually fail. And that has been documented. And the reason is not because they're not capable of those challenges, but rather because they're hired actually when companies are not doing well. That's a typical moment for people to look further, which is obviously not a good moment. But secondly, and more importantly, they're not being given the support that they need when they come on board. And I think that too is really, really, really important. It's important how you hire and who you hire and finding the person, but it's really important what type of structures you're building for when they come on board, what type of mentorship is available, what type of supports, what type of coaching. And I think that's another thing that we feel very, very strongly about. And when we think about building very successful hiring programs with companies, we strongly encourage mentorship, support groups, an opportunity for someone to talk maybe with one of the coaches that they've worked with in the past, or to have continued conversation both with others who are like them and with people who are sort of more traditionally and longer term in organizations. So I think those are three keys.
I love that. And I just want to jump back on the second point you raised too, because to me, I think that, and speaking from personal experience of hiring, like having the North Star and everyone is on this, like looking at the same thing in advance really helps. And I love the question Anne Marie raised, which I think is a really good one about intuition versus bias. And I would love, Yolanda, if you could chat a little bit about, how you're avoiding that bias by making sure people are on the same page beforehand so that you can kind of call people out on more qualitative reasons to not hire a candidate. If you're all looking at the same hopes and expectations, you all are on the same page. If you could chat a bit about that.
I think that's exactly it, is making sure that there is a certain amount of gut and intuition work that's going to go into it as far as management styles and personalities and things like that are concerned. We can't escape that truth. But this is a really poignant thing to bring up, and it's a very good point, because unconscious biases certainly can come into play whenever you're being comfortable with whatever is the environment that your lived experience has created as comfortable or as correct. And so I think that having those different voices and perspectives is really key. These decisions cannot be made in a vacuum, not even a vacuum of a few people. You don't want to crowdsource to the point that you can't get the work done. But you do want to make sure you have lots of different perspectives at the decision-making table and that everybody is on the same page about what you're looking at. We've just seen a few really interesting examples of there being a disconnect and misalignment between board members and executives that have been hired, and it didn't work out very well. And then sometimes it plays out very publicly. So I think that's a really key point, is to do this in proper community of varying perspectives while keeping your eye on the prize of exactly what is needed to fulfill that role, to fulfill the mission of the organization, and to ensure that the constituency is seeing themselves reflected in the executives that you're hiring, I think is really important. I just want to also add to a point that Judith made, seeing it from through a gender lens. What's fascinating about all of the box checking and thinking that you have to get the perfect person in that role and being open to different types of candidates is that we know for sure, the data tells us, men will look at a job description and say, oh, I have about 50% of what they're requiring there. I'm going to go for it. And women tend to say, oh, I'm only at 85%, or I didn't check every single box. I think I'm going to pass. And so it's something that we really try to encourage, is go for it. If the mission's there, if you have transferable skills, let's kiss that imposter syndrome goodbye, because we know that for sure. There's a gender disparity between how people see that. And so that's something that we're working to dismantle and disrupt in the best possible way. But it's a fact that we know is there. It's very interesting.
Yeah, that is so important, Yolanda. Thank you so much for raising that. Go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah, Mitch, and thank you, Yolanda. I love that you brought that up. There's one thing that I want to share, and I feel like everybody out there on this webinar needs to hear and share and keep talking about, is we intuitively approach this conversation and approach hiring from the standpoint of, what does the organization need? And we often forget to think about the other half of this equation, the candidate. And job searches are hard enough to begin with. And it's important that every time we approach or we go into this search process, we're thinking about the candidates and putting them first. They're not a means to an end. Every one of us has been out there on the market looking for jobs. We get it. We forget that when we're doing the hiring. And the reason I'm here today, the reason I started this firm, is because I was tired of being treated the way I was being treated, as a means to an end. And it's really critical for all of you out there. While your time is limited, while your resources are limited, while you have gaps to fill, it only takes a few extra minutes to preserve the dignity of candidates. And if you're rejecting them, do it by phone. Don't do it by an email. If they've applied and they're not a fit, respond to them and let them know that. Don't ghost them. Every action that you take in this search process is a reflection on your organization, and your organization is dependent on its reputation. Every one of those people who are applying are potential donors down the road. You don't know when you're going to cross paths again. You don't know if in 6 months you're going to need to refill that position and go back to these people. And so it's really important from a talent development and pipeline development perspective, but also just from a human perspective. The dignity of candidates is essential, and respecting that is so critical. So I'll get off my soapbox. I just want to share that. I'm going to keep saying it till I'm blue in the face, because there are so many people out there who don't have jobs for no fault of their own, or who are just looking for a better place to be themselves and to bring themselves to work. They deserve the dignity of a response and the respect of, positive or critical feedback, whatever it may be.
Thank you. It's a perfect way to end this discussion. I think dignity is the word I will hold coming out of this. Thank you so much for all of the amazing insight, everybody. We will put a summary of this together. The video will be available for you to share. So much rich things to bring into your hiring processes and teams. So I just want to thank the panelists and encourage anyone attending. If you fill out this survey that we'll pass the link on to you too, you'll get $50 in your Pond account for joining us today. So be sure and share that and give us some feedback. We really appreciate it. Thank you all. Good luck in your hiring.
Thank you.